I'm Mike Schur. This is Cord Jefferson. Before we begin, please no photos, no recording of any kind, no video. We are going to show a clip of the movie that Cord made later on. And don't record it yourself. That's bad. Hi, Cord. How are you?
Hi, Mike. I'm doing well. How are you?
Cord, I have a thesis. And I'm not going to tell you what it is. I'm going to tell you at the end. But the thesis I have regards you and the film you made. And what's happening is that I have written down some questions.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you the questions. You're going to answer them. And over the course of the interview, I'm going to attempt to prove my thesis.
Okay.
At the end, I'm going to reveal to you what my thesis is, and you are going to decide whether or not my thesis is correct.
Okay, this is wonderful. I'm so happy that I asked Mike to do this because Mike will always make something way more fun than it needs to be, and I really appreciate that. Thank you.
So for those of you who don't know, Cord, I'll get to how he and I met in a bit, but you came originally from the world of journalism. Your writing career has, I would say, 3 distinct chunks. Chunk number 1, journalism. So you were a blogger for a while, and what is interesting to me about your journalism career is that, and you can explain how this is true, I feel like even while you were doing journalism, you were also interested in like where the line blurred between journalism and I don't know what you would call it, meta-journalism, like the commentary about what journalism could and couldn't do. So my question for you really is, were you thinking about fiction writing while you were a journalist?
Yeah. The to me, sort of 2 of my artistic heroes are Joan Didion and James Baldwin, and it's not just yeah, he's into it. And it's not just because I like their writing and their work. It's because what it meant to be a writer to them was a very big thing. So, you know, they would write screenplays, and then they'd write a book of essays, and then they'd write a novel, and then they'd write a piece of journalism. Like it just felt like they were the kinds of writers who were just like, yeah, I can do that, I can do that, I can do that. And so I sort of always thought about writing fiction one day, but it always seemed like I would write novels because it felt like I didn't know anybody who worked in entertainment, and it, you know, if you don't really have access to people who work in the business, then it feels like, well, I don't know how to get in there. So it just felt like the walls were too high for me to get over them. And so I always assumed that I would write novels one day, but never screenplays.
I have like a visceral memory now that you bring this up of looking at like books on my mom's shelf of, you know, Gore Vidal or Norman Mailer, and it would say like other books by Gore Vidal, and it would be like books of essays, and then there'd be like 6 things, and like plays, and then like novels, and like historiographs or whatever. And I just remember thinking like, who are these people who can do all this stuff? Yeah. The answer is it's Cord Jefferson. Okay, so you become a TV writer, post-journalism. I think I met you when you were on Master of None, which was a show that I produced but did not create. If there is a common thread among the TV shows you've worked on, here's what I think it is. This is like a mini thesis within my larger thesis. Okay. I feel like you are either drawn to things or have self-selected for things, for projects that like aren't one thing. So Succession, searing drama, also maybe the funniest show on TV when it was on. Station 11, genre show, but also like apocalyptic, tiny and huge at the same time. Watchmen, like graphic novel, genre show, but also like meditation on like the Nixonian era, and also race and everything else. So am I right when I say that and The Good Place, which is where you and I work together, mostly like half-hour network comedy / like moral philosophy
meditation
lecture.
On death.
Yeah, / afterlife, yeah. So is this a coincidence is my question, or do you think at some level like these are the places you have tried to go actively or subconsciously?
Yeah, no, it's not a coincidence. It's I think the sort of like narrative thread that connects all those things is everything that I was trying to do is just something that felt like it was trying to swing for the fences. Everything felt like there's some ambition here to do something that feels at least a little bit different from what everybody else is doing. And I think that by the time that I really got into TV, just we had already had so many distractions. People were sort of like watching shows and movies less and less and less, and that was pre-TikTok and everything. And so I think that sort of all those distractions have only gotten even bigger. And so to me, always, I think it comes from journalism in that people have asked me sort of what lessons I take from journalism into the other stuff that I've worked on. And one of the most important lessons I think that I always take when I go into any project that I'm working on is why now? That's something I used to think about with journalism all the time. It's like, why should we put this story on the cover of the New York Times as opposed to the millions of other things that are happening in the world? And so as a journalist, you're approaching everything that you're writing about thinking like, why does this make sense in the world for this specific moment? Like, why should I be spending my time and energy on this specific thing? And so when I sort of approached all those projects, it just felt like, oh yeah, this seems like a good moment for this. This seems like it's timely and relevant and sort of has something to say about the world at present, as opposed to, rebooting a TV show to reboot a TV show from 50 years ago that was popular. Like, I think that there was a sort of a motivation behind all those shows, and they felt like there was, as I said, there was some ambition behind all those shows that felt different from everything else. And so that was always the goal. And I just feel very fortunate. That was why I chose the projects that I chose. I had no idea that whether they were going to be successful or not, but I always felt like I'd rather be working on some grand failure than sort of like a mediocre success, I think.
My version of that is, I think of it as the reason to live question. Like at some point, when I first started writing TV in the late 1960s, it was a very different world, and over the time that I've been doing it, the number of shows has quadrupled, and the number of like reboots is 25x what it was 10 years ago or whatever. And at some point I started from both a viewer standpoint and from a creative standpoint, I would think like, okay, well, someone would pitch me an idea, or I would come up with an idea, and it would be like, well, what's the reason for this to live? Like, what in this vast ocean of options that people have, is there a compelling reason to focus on this thing? I think that's the question we're all asking as consumers all the time. Like, how often do you hear about a show that comes out and you say like, hey, have you seen this show? And your friend will say like, I watched like 8 minutes of it and then I gave up.
Yeah. Because
it's like there's nothing. It's like we are drowning in options. And so from a creative standpoint, if the idea doesn't have a compelling reason that it must exist, it kind of maybe doesn't need to exist, and that's why like that list of shows, Station 11, Master of None, Succession, Watchmen, like those are shows that like have a very strong argument for like, here's why I think this is a worthwhile project to embark on.
Exactly.
Yeah. I just listened to what you said, and then I said the exact same thing with different words, which is what all great interviewers do. Two of the shows that you worked on, so Station 11 and Watchmen, are adaptations.
Yeah.
You won an Emmy for your episode of Watchmen. You wrote with Damon Lindelof, and you wrote in Station 11, and those are both adapting existing works. The movie you wrote is also an adaptation of an existing work.
Yeah.
I have questions for you about adaptations because I'm currently in the middle of the first one that I've ever done. First of all, what do you think about the debt that is owed to the source material? Like, how did you, both when you were working on those other shows, and also especially with the book, adapting the book into the movie, like, do you have a theory of mind here for like what do you owe the original source material, if anything, when you're adapting it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that to me, sort of something that I learned on Watchmen that Damon would say a lot, because we were taking huge departures from the source material. So we were coming up with our own brand new story that just needed to hew to the stuff that had happened in the original text, but we were just building our own world. And so, that can be a little dangerous because there is no restrictions there, and you can just blue sky and go crazy. And so the thing that Damon used to give us some structure to what we were aiming for was he would always say, like, does this feel Watchmen or does this not feel Watchmen? And to him, it was always like, it doesn't matter if this isn't something that sort of like is in the wheelhouse of the original story. It's more about kind of like, does this sort of like does this actually keep with the spirit of the original text more so than the letter of the original text? And so, and that's like the Supreme Court definition of pornography. Like, you know when you see it, that's an inaccurate measurement, but it's just kind of like, yeah, we just kind of, eyeballing it to see if that feels right. And so that's how I felt going into the movie and in Station 11 and in Watchmen. We took some huge departures from the source material. Like that, I would say maybe there's like, I would say like 2/3 of the movie are vastly different from the book, if not more. But I was always trying to maintain the essence of the original project. And so that to me is I think that to make I think the problem with some adaptations that don't necessarily work is that they're just they're not keeping with the spirit of it. And so the spirit of Watchmen always felt like a little dangerous and kind of like sexual and like dark, but also very, very funny and darkly funny at moments. So there was all this stuff that we were just aiming for. Like, for instance, like the Jeremy, I don't know if people have seen the show Watchmen, and so this is a spoiler, and it's also going to sound insane, but because that sort of was the show that we made. But there's like, there's scenes in which Jeremy Irons is on Europa, sort of like one of Jupiter's moons, and he's kind of living on this massive estate in the middle of space, but you don't know how he got to the middle of space, and he's killing all these servants and butlers and stuff. It's crazy. But
who are clones, by the way.
Yeah, they're clone
the
butlers, and he keeps murdering them in order to spell out an SOS message.
Well, hold on. You got to explain the whole thing. He murders them and then launches them into
trebuchet.
Yeah, using a giant catapult, and lands them in a pattern that spells out "Save me." What is? It
says like "Help me,
help
Dad,"
me.
or it's like your dad or something. Yeah. So it's just crazy, and like that has no bearing and sort of like that. It has no relationship really to the actual text. The relationship that it has to the actual text is just that it's weird and it feels Watchmen-y, and so that was always like, okay, this feels like it could be in the wheelhouse of Watchmen as opposed to like the letter, the sort of text dictates that this is here.
This is a fascinating subject for me, and I hope for the other people in this room. But frankly, I have the microphone and they don't. So I watched No Country for Old Men recently, which I hadn't seen in many years, and it's perfect. It's like a perfect movie. Yeah. And then I thought to myself, I haven't read No Country for Old Men since like, I don't know, 2006 or something. So I read it. It's just the movie. The movie is the book is the movie. Like it is shocking. Like entire scenes are just the dialogue for that Cormac McCarthy wrote, just put into final draft, I guess. And it reminded me then of when Kenneth Branagh was nominated for an Oscar for Best Adapted Screenplay for Hamlet. And the whole point of his Hamlet was it was the unexpurgated Hamlet. The unabridged Hamlet. He just shot Hamlet and then got nominated for an Oscar. What an amazing move. Such a heady play by that guy. And his Hamlet is, as I remember, great, and No Country for Old Men is perfect, and so it's like that is an artist making a decision to be 100% loyal, to have absolute fealty to the source material, and that being the right decision.
Yeah.
And then there is Damon and you and the rest of the Watchmen team saying this version of the Watchmen is set in Oklahoma City in contemporary America, and it has all of this stuff that has nothing that is you could not find a hint of in the source material, and yet Watchmen is also great. It's just an interesting. Damon gave me the same advice essentially when I was adapting something, and what he said was like, you boil it down to its essence. You come up with the 5 or 6 things that you can't make something with this title without doing, and then you at least put on the table the idea of throwing everything else away.
Yeah.
You have to open your mind to the possibility of throwing everything else away. I thought that was really good advice.
Yeah. That was
okay.
Yeah, no.
No, go ahead.
No, it's okay.
What? This is
Okay.
ridiculous. I cut you off. You're the person who's here
no.
being interviewed.
I'll tell you after.
All right.
Okay.
We're going to show a clip of the film now. Do you want to set up what part of the movie this is?
Yeah, so the movie, this is American fiction is based on this novel Erasure, and the quick and dirty version to catch you guys up here is that Jeffrey Wright plays a novelist named Monk who is frustrated that he's frustrated that everybody wants him to write a quote-unquote black book. And so a black book to them means slavery or somebody struggling in the inner city or a gang member or a crack dealer. And he's in sort of like a peak of frustration as to about everybody asking him to do this. He writes this book called My Pathology that's sort of like a send-up of all the expectations that people have for black work. And so he sends it to his agent. He tells his agent to send it around, and his agent's like, "This is really offensive. Nobody wants to buy this." And he's like, "I don't care. Send it around. I want to rub their noses in the garbage that they solicit from black writers." And so his agent says, like, "Okay, I'm only sending it to a couple people though, because this is going to torch your career." But now this is Monk coming into his agent's office to find out that in fact this book is a massive success.
So, I don't know, 3-4 years ago now, we were talking in person or texting, I don't remember, and you told me about this book.
Yeah.
And you said, I've read this book and it's great and I love it and you should read it. It's called Erasure by Percival Everett. And I read the book and I had two thoughts. Number one was, like, how did this book exist in the world for 15 or so years without anyone else telling me? Like, I was angry at my friends.
Yeah.
I was angry at my friends for not knowing about this and telling me about it.
Yeah.
But number two was, I feel like, because you had told me you wanted to option it, and it was like, this is a home run, is what I felt. Tell me about your experience reading it for the first time and then the process of adapting it. Let's get all that stuff out there.
Yeah. We'd all had a bad 2020. I think that I was sort of no different from anybody else, but besides the shitty 2020 that everybody else had, I had a big professional failing that year where I thought I was going to get this TV show on the air and came very close, and then they pulled the plug at the last minute. And so it was toward the end of the year. I was kind of feeling adrift. I didn't really know what I wanted to do next. And so I read this review for this book called Interior Chinatown. And in the review for Interior Chinatown, it said they had a satire reminiscent of Percival Everett's Erasure. And I had never heard of Erasure either. And so I went and read a synopsis. It sounded interesting to me, and I went and bought it. And then it was like, I don't know if you've had, I'm sure you have because you read so many books, but can you remember the last book that you read that felt like it was written specifically for you? That's how I felt when I read this book.
Yeah, I do. I won't say what it is, but
okay. Mein Kampf. I can see. We can talk about it after.
No, I just meant I don't want to distract from this.
Okay, got it. Didn't want to share. So I just read like it was written specifically for me. Like it was obviously the professional issues of like, what it means to be a black writer and sort of like the expectations that people put and limitations that people put on creatives of color. That stuff all resonated with me deeply since journalism. I was talking about that stuff with journalist friends of mine. But then, there's stuff that I don't want to spoil, but there's like a sibling dynamic in the film and in the book that sort of felt similar to mine. I have two older siblings, and sibling relationships have this push and pull sometimes, so that I empathized with. There's an ailing mother in the story, and like several years earlier, I had moved home to take care of my ailing mother. There's an overbearing father figure who kind of looms large in the novel and in the film, and I have an overbearing father figure who looms large in mine and my brother's lives. There was just kind of a lot of overlap to the point it started to feel eerie toward the more that I read it, the more I was like, oh my God, there's like one of the characters lives in Arizona. I'm from Arizona. The book is set in D.C. I used to live in D.C. and then Monk also lives in L.A. and I was living in L.A. It just started to feel, even down to like the smaller details, that this was made just for me. And so it also felt like I could adapt it, and it could be something that I could ask for a smaller amount of money for. I wouldn't need to come in and say I need $50 million for my first movie. I could come because there's no way somebody would give me that, and so I could come in and say this is a, small movie, big ideas. That was sort of like the thing that it felt like I could punch above weight class as far as sort of the themes and discussions we were having. Compared to sort of like the amount of money that I needed to make the film.
Well, I would imagine the fact that the book came out in 2003,
2001.
2001. So this book has just been out there for 20 years at this point, and it has a great story, a really rich and interesting story. We'll get to in a second, but the fact that like no one has, it was like discovering an actor. A great actor who was 45 and not famous or something. It's like this has been out there the whole time waiting for someone to come along and see in it what you saw in it. That was probably also a very rewarding feeling of like, it's like you discover, you were like you were like on the beach with a metal detector and found a diamond ring.
Yeah, truly. And just and through just random coincidence, like had I not read that review of Interior Chinatown, I very likely wouldn't have discovered this.
Did you end up reading Interior Chinatown?
I didn't. I was too focused on this when I read this book and fell in love with it immediately and just ran away.
Okay, so here's the thing about this book that I truly loved, and also about the movie that you made, and this is I was trying to think of comps for this, and I don't know if there are any. Maybe someone can help me out here. So the book is obviously a satire. It's a satire of the ways in which the machine kind of cranks out certain kinds of art for people in a kind of cynical way. It's a satire of the way that white audiences react to black art. It's a satire of like the publishing world in general. It's all this stuff. But the essential piece of satire is about how the kind of corporate world, I would say, or the business side of art just flattens everything and makes it unidimensional, right? And so Monk writes this book deliberately, as dumbly as he can. He writes the dumbest thing he can think of to write, and it becomes an enormous success. And then without spoiling anything, including the best joke in the book and the movie, he tries to make it dumber. He tries repeatedly to get it to be so dumb that they won't publish it, and every time he does, it ends up becoming more successful as a project. But here's what I think is so fascinating about the book and why I loved it so much. At the same time that you're getting this pretty broad, comedic, satiric look at that set of issues, you are also getting a really tiny, lovely, well-wrought, nuanced story of a man and his sister and their brother and their ailing mother and their ailing mother's nurse and their ailing mother's nurse's new boyfriend, and all of the people in his very multi-dimensional life. And so the movie is simultaneously making the point. It's like it's satirically making a point, and then the other half of the movie is making the point that is being satirized by the first half of the movie. It's a really interesting thing. Usually with a satire, you just get satire. And after a while, you're like, yeah, all right, I get it. Like, you're making your point over and over again. This movie and the book is split down the middle. And half of the movie is the satire, and the other half of the movie is a story that proves the point the satire is trying to make. Yeah. I don't think I've ever seen that before in that. It's like 50-50, right? It's like... and that's a really, I don't know, there's no question here. I'm just literally just saying this out loud. This is a thought I've been having for a while about this project, but like, is that, I guess here's the question, like, was that part of what made you want to do this? Is that particular aspect of it? Yeah,
this felt like a thing that I set out because I wanted to make, I always told everybody who came aboard that I wanted to make something that's satirical that wasn't farcical. I sort of really wanted to make sure we avoided farce, because I think that, as you said, when satire becomes too heavy, it starts to feel silly and slapsticky, and sort of like, I think that what you're sort of like the messages will say, I don't think that there is a message, but I think that sort of like, some of the satire can get lost amid that kind of slapsticky silliness. I think that sort of it becomes unremarkable in a way and collapses under the weight of the comedy. And so I sort of wanted to make something that towed the line between those two things. And I think that to me, we didn't get the balance all the time on set. I tried to get the balance in the script, and then sometimes when we were shooting it, I didn't get the correct balance, and then we really found the tone in the edit where we sort of sometimes there's a scene. Oh fuck! I'll spoil it. I don't want to spoil it, but there's like a couple scenes in the film that are like that were more like broadly comedic like that, where I just let the camera roll and like let people, like that woman right there is named Miriam Shore, and she's an incredible comedic actress she's like so funny at improv. She's amazing. And so sometimes I would just let the camera roll on her and sort of like her scene partner, and she would do amazing stuff. And that I thought was like, oh, for sure that's going to be in the movie. And then we get into post, and it just felt like, oh, this is a little too silly. It starts to become farcical, and then there would be moments when it would get really, really dark and dramatic, and almost like a nosediving plane. It's hard to pull out of that to get to something with more levity in it. And so it was just sort of like really sanding down the edges once we got into post to figure out how exactly to marry those two in a way that felt really right for the film.
Tone is the hardest part of making anything, I think.
Absolutely.
And I remember I used to work on the show The Office, and we were visited by the British Office people, Stephen Merchant and Ricky Gervais, and they told us something that I think about all the time, which is they thought if they had a scene and the scene wasn't working for some reason, they would do 3 takes in a row. And the first take, they would do it as boringly as they could. Like, this is a straight drama or an actual documentary involving boring people in a boring place. Then they would go back and they would do the craziest, broadest, silliest, most over-the-top take they could possibly muster, just chewing the scenery, wildly over the top. And on the third one, they would all aim for the exact middle of those two. And what they said, unsurprisingly, was like, yeah, most of the time, that was how we got to where the line was, where the tone was, because the tone of that show was alternately absurdist and very real. But they also said that sometimes they would watch like the super boring take, and they'd be like, we like this one. We're just going to use this one. So like, you just never know. It's like, it's a tone is the only thing I think in a movie or TV show that you have to search for in every moment of your work. Like every script page, every line of dialogue, and then when you're shooting, every moment you're like, is this right? Is this right? Is this right? Like, you don't have that about, like, the actors are going to like embody their character well. But from a writing standpoint, I feel like you're searching for it every second.
Yeah, it's been something that's been interesting about the film is that when we were doing friends and family screenings, we would frequently ask people like, what do you is this a comedy or drama to you? And some people would say, well, this is a dark comedy. Some people would say, well, it's a drama with a lot of levity. Some people would say dramedy. Now that the movie's out, it's been interesting to see that like it's sort of like kind of people think of it as just it's being
really
discussed as a comedy movie in many ways. Yeah, which I think has been an interesting development and one that I didn't see coming, because I think that it does toe the line between the two, but it seems like people say that it airs more toward the side of comedy for them.
That's probably good, right? I think you'd rather have people go into it thinking that it's a comedy than and then getting surprised by the nuance and the
absolutely,
than the other way around.
Absolutely, and I think that it probably is. It's probably 60-40 comedy to sort of like drama, I would say. So I think that it does skew more toward comedy. It's just been, I think that to me is always preferable. I wanted this to be a movie that people went into and laughed and had a good, because I just think that especially when you're dealing with issues of race, I think that the impulse for everybody is to be super self-serious, which is one of the things that the movie's trying to talk about. And I think that I never wanted people to come into this feeling like they were being lectured for 2 hours about race
that's the
in
worst.
America. Yeah.
So you optioned the book, and you've never directed anything before. Have you written a movie before?
No.
You've never written a movie before, and you've never directed anything before, and you option the book, and then you write the screenplay, and then you sell the movie, and then you make the movie, and Jeffrey Wright's in the movie, and Tracee Ellis Ross is in the movie, and Issa Rae's in the movie, and then you edit the movie, and the movie comes out and wins a bunch of awards at festivals, and now people are talking like you're going to win an Oscar.
Yeah.
And so my question is, first of all, how dare you? But I want to talk about the part of that insane ride that you've been on, where specifically you are trying to get people to buy the movie, because I can't imagine it was an easy sell. And I also wonder how you platformed it to the people who could write a check to help you make this. Like what was essentially your pitch besides the source material? What was your pitch for what you wanted to accomplish?
The script. So this was both very, very easy to get made and very, very difficult to get made. And so I was I went to Percival Everett and I talked to Percival, who's an amazing guy. If you haven't read his work, I highly recommend it. I think people toss around this word too much, but I think he's an actual genius. And Percival's also a guy who, like, I've never met somebody who gives less of a shit about anything. Like, Percival just he doesn't care about awards, he doesn't care about money, he doesn't, like, all he cares about is making art. He just cares about writing and painting. Like, he writes books so fast that his publisher had to tell him to stop writing so fast because they were like, you're cannibalizing your previous work. Like, if you release a book a year, then you're cannibalizing the sales of another book. So just stop. And he was like, okay. And so then I went over to his house one day and he was like, for dinner, and he brought out an abstract painting and he goes, this is an abstract painting I did for you. It's about Charles Mingus. And I was like, okay, thanks, man. Cool. So now I have like an abstract painting that he gave me.
Can you describe the painting?
It's a
completely abstract.
Oh yeah, completely abstract. I don't know. I'm still trying to understand where Mingus is in it, but I appreciate it. He was telling me a story one day about how he was like, yeah, I was breaking down this horse, and I was like, what? And he goes, oh yeah, my ranch. I have a ranch in town, and we break wild horses. And I was like, what? Where do you find time to do this? He's also a professor at USC of creative writing. Like, he's an amazing man. But all that's to say that when I went to him, I was just passionate about it. He wanted to get on the phone with me, asked me why I wanted to do it. And I talked to him for about a half an hour, and then he gave me the rights for free for 6 months. He said, go write a script, and if anything comes of it, then you can pay me after that. Like, it wasn't any money. No money exchanged hands. He just said, you sound passionate about it, so go write it. And so I went and wrote it on spec just because I was excited about it. And then I sent it out, and there was so what I mean when I say that it's like easy and hard. So the producers, we sent it out to like 14 producers, and a bunch of them were interested. And I ended up going with T Street. It's Ryan Johnson and Ron Bergman's company, because they greenlit it in the room. They just said, we're going to make it. And nobody else said, we're going to make it. Everybody else said, great, we want to package it up, and we'll bring it out and get a bunch of money. But T Street just said, we have the financing, we're just going to make the movie. And so I went with them. And then we went and got Jeffrey. We sent the script to Jeffrey, and Jeffrey signed on after a few months. And so by then it was like T Street, MRC's financing it. We have Jeffrey, we have the script, and I'm going to direct it. And the night we were going to take it out to distributors. And the night before we took it out to distributors, I'll never forget, my manager called me and he goes, get ready for a bidding war. There's gonna be so much money. He's like, we're gonna sell this for so much money. Get ready. It's gonna be crazy.
What a stupid thing to say.
I know. Because I was like, oh shit, okay, great, wow, what? Okay, sure. And so
it's like a stand-up comedian coming out and going like, I'm gonna come back on this stage in a couple minutes, and you are gonna see the funniest shit you have ever seen. I'm gonna destroy out here. So prepare yourselves. Everything you've ever seen in your life that you thought was funny is going to pale in comparison to what I am about to do. Let's go.
And then you hard cut, and guess what? But the thing is that I believed him, because the minute that first of all, we sent it to tons of distributors. We had like 15 meetings. We were meeting so many people. We were meeting with every streamer, every big studio. And in every single meeting, it was like, oh my God, we love this script. Like, oh my God, we love Jeffrey Wright. Oh my God, what's your vision for it? Oh my God, the script is one of the best scripts. Oh God, people were freaking out. Legitimately, people were freaking out, and I started to feel like, okay, maybe we are in a bidding war situation. And then it got to the end of 2 weeks, and there was nothing. Just absolutely silence. We got one offer from Orion MGM, who we ended up going with. And then the second offer we got was from a company that was offering us millions of dollars less than the production budget. And so we would have made a loss. And so the resounding response that I heard from so many people was, oh my God, I wish I worked at a place where we could make this movie. Oh my God, I wish I worked at a place where we could make this movie. Oh man, we love this so much. We just can't make this movie here. And it was like, I sort of had known that the industry was risk averse. I sort of that's not surprising, but I think that I was truly taken aback at how risk averse. Like I'd never brought something out that had such like almost universal interest. Like let's meet about this. Like there was like almost nobody passed based on just the script alone. It was just kind of like, yeah, we want to meet. And then, you know, it was just that they just didn't have, and you know, these people saying like, we can't make this movie are people who like regularly make $150 million movies. Like multiple times a year they'll make those. This is not a movie.
Isn't it one of the weirdest things about this world we're in now is the $150 million movie is less risky than the $3 million movie somehow.
Yeah.
And I assume it's a combination of IP, algorithmic programming, built-in audience, global appeal, what's it going to open at in China, blah, blah, blah. But like there is something fundamentally so stupid, even for Hollywood, about the idea that it's way less risky to make The Marvels than it is to make your movie.
Totally.
When your movie's budget was some very small number.
Under $10 million, like significantly under 10.
Yeah, and like that, it's like I'm sure that there is a logic there, but I've always been like, no, when they're like, I wish I worked at a place that could make this movie. You do.
Exactly.
You could make it.
Exactly.
You're licensed by the state of California, right? Like, no one will like come and shut you down for making a movie.
And also if they made this movie and it was like a flop, like nobody's losing their jobs.
Right.
Nobody's going bankrupt. They don't. It's like a drop. It's like a rounding error for them that year.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just like.
But it's money they bury in the like surplus charges of other productions and stuff. And it's very odd.
Probably what they spent for COVID protocols on the Marvels.
Yeah.
My budget of my movie.
Yeah, it was the ham and cheese sandwich budget on the Marvels. I wish that there were. You know, I was thinking about this the other day because someone was mentioning Steve Buscemi's career, and I was like, you know, Steve Buscemi was like the guy, to me at least, who invented the one for me, one for them thing, right? He would be in like Con Air, and would like lend his talents to or Armageddon, and then he would make some tiny little indie movie that was clearly the thing he wanted to do, Trees Lounge, and then he would just oscillate, and like and you would be so psyched when you watch some big dumb movie and Steve Buscemi would show up, and then you would go like see the real movie that he wanted to do. And I wonder why studios don't function that way. Like why when you have the ability to make those like giant tentpole movies, if you make one and it hits, if you make whatever Avatar 7 and it makes it $5 billion, why not say like, hey, we're gonna take $30 million of that profit and we're gonna make three $10 million movies?
But this is my theory, and you're a perfect person to talk about with this because you've been working in the industry way longer than I have, and so my theory is that the way that it's sort of like put its tentacles into everything is like that it's tech, right? Like tech, you read about sort of like the downfall of these companies, and it's like, you know, I had a friend who worked at sort of like one of the early people at Uber, and he was telling me that they would write on walls like growth at all costs, when they were first starting out. And then, you know, you read about WeWork, and it's like, the guy's like, we need a WeWork Costa Rica. And everybody's like, why? No, we don't. No, everybody just wants to surf in Costa Rica. Nobody wants a WeWork in Costa Rica. But he's like, we just need a presence there. We need a presence there. And there's just like this perpetual growth mindset in tech that's like, we just need more and more users every single quarter until sort of like we plateau because every single person in the world is using it, right? And it's like you can't do that with it. It just feels like
it's the literal definition of a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah, and so
right?
so do you feel like that's what's happened? Because I just feel like it's the influence of tech on everything.
I think it's two things. I think that the influence of tech in Hollywood, it's a uniquely shitty merging of two ideals, because Hollywood famously is nobody knows anything, right? This is an ethereal business. Where do ideas come from? How do people interpret art? How do we reflect the culture back on itself? Tech is efficiency, 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 efficiency. Cut the fat, cut the fat, cut the fat. Sacrifice everything for the sake of efficiency. So you merge those two things and you get an efficiency-obsessed Hollywood is a Hollywood that doesn't allow for any like any weird tendrils of creativity, any kind of like rough around the edges ideas. Every great show in the history of Hollywood, every great movie in Hollywood, to some extent, it has come from one person in one room standing up and saying, I don't know anything, I love this, I think this is great, we're going to do this. Is it going to work? I don't know. Like, but we're going to try because I believe in it and I think it's good. And the tech approach to that is to eliminate that line of thinking. The tech approach is retro-engineer the audience for a project, see if the project meets the audience's needs. If it does, make it. If it doesn't, don't make it. It doesn't matter whether it's good. It doesn't matter whether it's interesting or whether it is reflective of the zeitgeist. It couldn't matter less. It doesn't matter. If the algorithm shows you that 98 consecutive minutes of like a gerbil running in circles in a cage would please a certain percentage of the audience of the people who subscribe to your thing, they would make a movie called Billy the Happy Gerbil, and it would just run in a cage, and then it would make a certain number of people would subscribe, and a certain number of money would flow to their coffers, and they wouldn't care whether or not what they made was good or bad. So this is the fear. This is like the living nightmare I think that we're in right now, is that the merging of tech and Hollywood has led to a it's not just a monoculture. Like we were already kind of in a monoculture. We're now in a world where every company is looking at your script and others like it and not thinking like, do I think this is good? Do I care about this? Do I think this has something to say? Does it have a reason to live? What they're thinking is, will the return on investment of this project meet the like delta that was put onto that, to like someone scrawled on a wall, growth at all costs? And if it doesn't, they don't make it, and they don't care. And look, I'll say one more thing about this, and then I'll shut up. But we have always, all of us, known that Hollywood is where the rubber of commerce meets the road of art, right? Or vice versa. It's like, I used to work at SNL back in the late 1930s, and what they would say was, they would say, like this writer that I worked with would say, when I was particularly happy with something that went on the air, he would say, like, we're selling light bulbs, man. Just remember, this is back when GE owned. This is how old I am. GE owned NBC, and he would go, like, just remember, you're selling light bulbs. Like, don't get too caught up in like the art of what we're running comedy sketches and selling light bulbs. And he's right. And that remains true. We all understand that we are making a certain kind of bargain, which is you got to make people money, and if you don't make people money, they don't make your stuff. That's fine. I'm fine with that. What I don't like, and what I can't really abide, is the idea that now the tech bros have come in, and they've gone a step further than that. It's not just do more things that we make money than lose money. Now it's how do we sand off every tiny edge? How do we make a perfectly smooth pebble that is inoffensive to everyone in the world so that everyone in the world will subscribe to our service? That's a bad version of Hollywood, and I fear that is the one that we are heading toward or are already in right now.
Yeah, and I mean, and to your point exactly, this movie exists because three people like were willing to risk something to make it. Like without those, like it was like two people at T Street and then like one person at Orion. Like without those three people, this movie doesn't get made because there's just such risk aversion everywhere else.
Yeah, and you know what's sad is like the folks who have the other attitude, the tech bro attitude of efficiency, growth at all costs, etc. Like there are echoes of this that I'm sure will become evident in maybe the modern political world. But what you hope is that they have shame, right? What you hope is that they pass on something, and then that thing comes out, and everyone's like, that is an incredible piece of art, and also it was an economic success. Don't you feel shame for passing on it? And their answer is no. They don't care less. They couldn't care less. They don't care because they weren't approaching this from the standpoint of can we make something good that makes money. They're just approaching it from like, it doesn't meet our efficiency matrix like benchmark, so we're not going to make it, and it doesn't matter. They feel no I have found in my experience that people who pass on projects in this world don't feel shame when those projects go on to great success.
Oh no, I remember reading. Do you remember reading that STX article in the New Yorker?
Which
Remember
one?
that? Like years ago, it was like when they were first starting STX.
I don't think so.
I can't remember, but it's that company that had a bunch of funding from like Chinese billionaires, and they were asking the new head of the company if he would like make movies from the past. And one of the ones that I remember them asking him is they said, "Would you make Shawshank Redemption, like universally beloved movie?" And he said, "No, there's no like real tentpole possibilities in Shawshank Redemption." And I was like, you know that's a successful movie though. Like he knows that it's a successful film, but there wasn't potential for like sequels, and he was not interested.
I feel like that you could make a sequel of that movie. They're on the boat together. They crash land on an island. It's a castaway, but there's two of them.
Buddy comedy.
All right, how much time? We have 9 minutes left. All right, let's talk about the ending of the movie without spoiling the ending of the movie, okay?
I don't think is it possible?
Well, no, I don't want to talk about the actual ending. I want to talk about the concept of endings, okay? Because there was a question that we had a conversation about. Other people I know had a conversation with you about how to end the movie. And you had several different endings in mind, and we're not going to talk about which one you chose.
Yeah.
But I think that the reason it's of interest to me is because in a movie, especially a movie that is satirical, there are what ends up usually happening in a script like this is there are super, super dark endings. There are super like light and comedic endings, and kind of everywhere in between. So when you were considering the different endings, which I know you shot multiple endings.
Yeah.
When you were considering all of them and their different tones, like what was most important to you? That it felt true to the story you told, that it left the audience with the right idea of what was going to happen to these characters in the future. Just walk me through that, because I'm curious how you make that choice.
I wanted it to feel emotionally and intellectually satisfying. And so I actually ended up putting an ending in the film that I was really reluctant to put in. But after we did a test screening, there was kind of there was a lot of people who said, "Don't touch the end, leave the ending exactly as I loved it." But then there was also a significant portion of people who said, "I really like the ending on an intellectual level. I don't really like the ending on an emotional level." And me being like wanting to be a stupid auteur was like, well, I don't care about like all the emotional, like this is schmuck bait, like let's just keep it intellectually satisfying. And the more that I started thinking about it, the more people were coming to me and saying like, I think they might be right, and I think they might be right. And I think that was, at a certain point you have to, this is a collaborative thing. You have to realize that the people around you are around you because you trust them. And so I started trusting the people who were around me and saying like, you should try to, let's try to satisfy both. And now I'm so happy with the ending that we chose. And I think that there is something, to these, to our job about sticking the landing. That's really, I think that if you can have something that's really flawed, as long as you really stick the landing, I think that sort of like you can have it sort of makes up for so much of what you just watched. Like I don't want to name the movie because I don't want to shit talk anybody. But so I watched a movie recently that had like I called it a third act solution, where it was like the first hour of the movie I was like, oh, I don't know if this is for me, and then the last half hour was so good that it made up for everything in the sort of like previous hour, and I've been telling everybody to watch it. And so I think that like if you can really stick the landing sometimes and keep people feeling emotionally satisfied, then I think that people will tolerate a lot. And so I think that for me, it's so hard to talk about this without telling you guys what the ending of the movie is. I wish we could just show you the
It's a deeply frustrating.
I know. I wish I could just show you the damn movie. But it's I think that one person that I talk to a lot about endings is Damon Lindelof,
right?
Our mutual friend, and because I think Damon is so haunted by what happened with Lost, and sort of feels so. It's true. It's true. He talks about. I'm not speaking out of school. He's talked about it in a bunch of articles that like Lost, the ending of Lost, and the response to the ending of Lost was very upsetting for him, and so he thinks a lot about endings now, and so that's something that we really thought about with Watchmen. I know it's something he really thought about for Leftovers. I loved the ending of Leftovers. Thought it was really brilliant and beautiful, and so I just think that I learned from him that kind of making something feel of a piece with what everybody's just watched, and making something feel, even if it isn't intellectually satisfying, even if it's not like clever, if it's sort of emotionally satisfying and feels like it's like tied up the thing in a bow for people, like people are going to forgive a lot of mistakes that you made on the lead up to that.
I think that it's probably true that the moment that you like actually begin to mature as a writer is the moment that you stop caring about something being intellectually satisfying and you start caring about it being emotionally satisfying.
Yeah.
Like because it's essentially like, do you care about like what the cool kids are gonna say about your movie, or do you care if the movie actually affects people in like a real emotional way?
That's
and
really
yeah.
I
spent so much of my youth really concerned about what like certain people would think of what I did, instead of like, is what I'm doing good and interesting and meaningful.
Yeah.
You know. And it was fun. It was the Greg Daniels who like basically taught me like, this does like clever. It's basically the line from Fight Club. It's like, how's that working for you? Being clever, you know, like.
It's funny that you say that, because that's something that one of the producers and I talked. One of the producers on the film is Ben LeClaire, and one of the things I talked with Ben about a lot is like, I was like, Ben was the one who was saying like, don't do the cool thing. He kept telling me that. He said like, I know this is cooler, but like we shouldn't do that. It's a bad idea. Like, we've made something that feels more big tent than that. It feels like you can invite more people into it. And I was reluctant to do that a lot of the time, but at a certain point I just started realizing like, oh yeah, there's a method to this. Yes. And now one of the things that has been so gratifying to me to see is that I was really, really worried that a movie with a bunch of black people in it, people that I talked to that I work with, were like, we were all worried that it was going to scare away people who weren't black. You know, this is movies and TV shows with sort of like predominantly black cast don't necessarily feel like they're like accessible for other people who aren't black. That's just a sort of like reality of the industry, and sort of the reality of what people see when they see a movie poster with a bunch of black people on it. And one of the things that has been really gratifying to see is that, you know, we've shown the movie to predominantly black audiences, predominantly white audiences, mixes, older people, younger people, like people who aren't American, people who are American, like all across the spectrum. And, you know, it's not like everybody comes out like saying this is the greatest thing they've ever seen, but there is a big swath of diversity when it comes to sort of like the people who have been enjoying the film. And I think that one of the reasons why is because, you know, I followed Ben's advice and sort of like didn't make something that would be cool for people in New York and LA, and then sort of like alienating. Like, one of the main things is like, I wanted to call the movie Fuck. Like that was when I sent you the script to read, the movie was called Fuck.
That, yeah.
Yeah, and so
there's a reason for that.
There's a method to the madness. I promise.
It's in the book.
It makes sense why I wanted to call it that, but you know, everybody was super anti it, and I was like, no, fuck it. Like, that's what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be radical, man. Like, get in people's faces.
Did you say it in that tone of voice?
Yeah, that's how I talk. I mean, that's how I talk when I'm not. That's my code switching is like, it's like, this is how I talk publicly, and then all the other times it's like I'm a surfer from the 80s. No, yeah. But it just felt like that was my hill to die on, because I felt like this is cool and it's making a statement. And then everybody was like, yeah, but what if this means that the MPAA won't give it a rating, and then it won't be shown and sort of like anywhere except for like your hipster movie theaters in New York and LA? Is that cool? And I realized like, oh no, that's not why I made this.
Yeah.
I don't want it to just be a thing that shows at those movie theaters. So we changed the title, and it was like, I'm really happy that they convinced me to do it.
Briefly, I'll tell this story. When I was on The Office and Jim was going to propose to Pam, spoiler alert, 2008 or whatever. So they shot 3 versions of it. It happened at a gas station, and they shot 3 versions of it, and the version 1 was the cameras were completely like, it was like the documentary crew had rushed to catch up and were like across the street shooting through traffic. You could just see it in the distance. And then version 2, and they were mic'd and you could hear them. Then version 2 was like, it was like spy from across the street. And then version 3 was like they were right up next to them, like shooting it like you would shoot a normal TV show. And in the version from across the street, the idea was you couldn't hear anything they said. It was a silent film. and you heard traffic whizzing by and birds chirping and stuff, and you saw Jim get down on one knee and open a box, and Pam go like this and whatever. So we shot those two, all those versions, and they showed the version that was silent. And it was like the hair on my arms stood up, and I felt like I was like witnessing something so beautiful and great. It had echoes of the British show, famous scene of the British show when Tim takes off his mic and goes in and talks to Dawn, and then comes back out and says like she said no or whatever. If anyone has seen that show, but it was I was like, this is the most beautiful. This is so lovely and great and so like ethereal and amazing and such great filmmaking. And we had this huge debate, and Greg Daniels and others, Paul Feig, who shot it, were like, no, we're going to do the version where you can hear them talk. And I was like, why? And they were like, because you have like 5 years of an audience who's deeply invested in a romance. You want to deny them just like one character saying, I love you, will you marry me? And the other one saying, yes, I love you too. And then like, why would you deny them that? Like, it's already a documentary. It's already like there's all these kind of layers and membranes between the audience and the people. Like, don't do this sort of super arch thing all the time. Do it in the margins, but sometimes when a beloved character is proposing marriage to another character, maybe just let the audience enjoy the moment and be with them and having a nice emotional reaction, you know? Yeah. Anyway. All right, I said I had a thesis. Remember?
Okay, yeah.
Okay, my thesis essentially was, given the writer that you are and the ways that you worked in journalism and television and now movies, given the subject matter of the book, given the fact that the main character in the book is himself a writer, given the fact that I think you are drawn in your life to projects with multiple layers, projects that aren't, stories that aren't one thing or another, but rather are many things, are many nuanced things layered together, I kind of think at the end of the day that this story is the story that you were born to tell as your first project. Do you think I'm right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I nailed it.
It's crazy that you say that. Truly, I was just talking to my girlfriend today, and I called it my life's work, kind of as a joke, but I was kind of not joking. I think that like literally everything that I've done before this, and like even to like I was raised in a very weird household with a black Republican father and a white liberal mother, and so even sort of like from the earliest days, like just there was nothing taken for granted, and everything was more complicated than like it was kind of, I saw the sort of differences in both sides and people's different opinions about things. And so I sort of like really grew up feeling like everything is more nuanced and complex than we really sort of allow for, particularly in American culture. And so, yeah, this is absolutely, I think, the culmination of just everything that I've done in my life. It feels very weird.
Do I win something? How does this work?
Yeah, I mean, you got to do this.
Thank you all very much for joining us.
Congrats. Thank you all so much. I was going to say congrats to you.
Congratulations for having listened to us.
Thank you all so much for coming, and thank you to Mike for doing this.